morning, everyone. I'm Deanna Palm, President and CEO of the Washington County Chamber of Commerce. Thank you very much for joining us and our first community conversation, which will be a virtual event that we hold every month regarding a topic that would hopefully be of interest to you. So again, thank you very much for joining us today. And I think we have a great topic to launch our program, our new program, which is an update on Washington County public safety, super important. And we have with us the folks that have their hand on the pulse of public safety in Washington County, District Attorney Kevin Barton and Washington County Sheriff Pat Garrett. So I am going to turn it over to you two, and you can decide who would like to start the conversation.
Thank you. Pat, did you want to go first, or would you like me to?
No, I think, what worked earlier this morning worked.
Perfect.
That puts you up first.
Okay, well, let me start by saying thank you. Thank you, Deanna, for the invitation, and thank all of you for listening to us. I've got a few things I'd like to cover, but then I really want to leave plenty of time for Q&A and dialogue. So don't hesitate to interrupt me, or save your questions for the end, whichever you prefer. I'd like to maybe just start and ground all of us with a real story of a real crime in our community to sort of put everything in perspective. A few months ago, the week before Christmas in Sherwood, which is where I live, actually less than a mile from my house, there was a woman who was up about 1 a.m. the week before Christmas doing what most parents were doing late at night the week before Christmas. She was wrapping Christmas presents. Everyone in her house was asleep, her husband and her kids. And while she was up at 1 a.m. In the kitchen doing that wrapping, her phone buzzed and she looked at it. And they have these security cameras that many of you might have as well, the Ring or the Arlo type cameras. And when she looked on her phone, it was an alert, and she could see a video of a man actively trying to break into her house at that moment. And so that, of course, is everyone's worst nightmare to have. And she did what anyone in her situation would have done. She immediately woke up her husband and they called 911. And the story turned out very well for them. The Sherwood police responded and were there in under 2 minutes. They immediately searched for this man who had been trying to break into her home. There was a dog track, and they actually found him shortly after that and arrested him, and he was taken to jail. So that's exactly what should happen in that scenario. But that's 1 a.m. in Sherwood the week before Christmas. What she didn't know at that moment, but we later found out, is a few hours earlier, around 11 p.m. that same night in Portland, that same man attempted to, and actually did, break into a home in Portland. And that's how his evening began. So he walked up the street, most likely from a homeless encampment, which is down the street from this home in the West Hills area of Portland, took a brick and threw it through a basement level window in Portland and gained entry into that home. In that home, another family lived there, and everyone in that family was asleep also, except for one person. There was an 8-year-old girl. She was in bed 11 p.m. reading when she was supposed to be asleep. And she heard everything happen. She heard the broken glass. She heard the man gain entry, and she heard him rummaging around the house downstairs. She knew someone was in the home, but she was too scared to walk across the hallway and wake her parents up. And so as this man was doing all the things, rummaging through the home downstairs, he made the decision to then walk upstairs. And as he was walking upstairs, he actually knocked into something hanging on the wall, and it fell down and it caused a racket. That's what woke up the parents. The dad woke up, opened up the bedroom door to see which of his kids was awake, which is a normal assumption a parent might make, who's out of bed. And that's when that dad confronted this man, this intruder, in his home upstairs. So the story there could have gone a couple different directions, as you can imagine. And luckily and thankfully, the intruder turned and ran. He ran downstairs, he ran outside. He had already stolen the keys to the family's car. He jumped into their BMW and drove south out of Portland. And God knows why, he ended up in Sherwood. And that's when he then tried to break into that second home with the woman I started off by telling you about. So when that Portland family called 911 around 11 p.m. that night, they were on hold for 10 minutes before the dispatcher said, 911, what's your emergency? And the reason I tell that story is I think it's a good example of literally a tale of two cities, of a public safety system that is working and functioning in one area of the metro area, Washington County, and a public safety system that's failing and collapsing in another area in Portland. And it's tempting, I think, to think that the two are separate, that's over there, that's in Portland. But I can tell you with absolute certainty and with statistics, which I'll get into in a moment with crime stats, there is a connection between the two. Crime does not stop at the county line. When I think about what our biggest challenges are, and I'm often asked this question, what are the big challenges that you see in the DA's office and in the criminal justice system? There's really three things that jump out at me, and they are addiction, rising addiction that we're dealing with, drug addiction. It is resources, making sure we have a well-resourced public safety system in Washington County. And it's Portland. It's those three things that, in my mind, are bigger than any other issues that we're dealing with. On the addiction front, I can tell you that addiction is skyrocketing, not just in Washington County, not just in Oregon, but region-wide. And there's lots of reasons behind that. It didn't just start yesterday, but one thing that really throwed fuel on the fire is a change in law about a year ago called Ballot Measure 110. Ballot Measure 110 essentially decriminalized the use of street drugs like meth and heroin. And it did it with a promise of increasing treatment. In fact, it was titled the Treatment and Rehabilitation Act. And most people voted for it, thinking that it would provide more treatment, not less. Unfortunately, it's been utter chaos, and it's been well documented in media. Oregonian, OPB, and others have covered this. There has been a real lack of treatment available. And what we've seen is, even though our system 2 years ago that we had in place, which used the criminal justice system to make sure people were forced to undergo treatment as a condition of their probation, that system was not perfect. It had huge flaws, but it was the only real bridge to treatment that we had. And what 110 did was it tore down that bridge, that flawed but functioning bridge, but it didn't replace it with anything. And now we're in a situation where drug treatment has dropped tremendously. Overdose incidents are up, overdose deaths are up, children exposed to drugs are up, property crime is up. And when people are stealing catalytic converters, stealing cars, stealing packages, shoplifting, a significant percentage of that is driven by addiction. And that's a huge challenge that we're dealing with. So that's challenge one. Challenge two is resources. Our Washington County public safety system functions very, very well. We are the safest large county in the state. Our combined property and violent crime rate is 30% lower than the state average and 50% lower than Portland. Our homicide rate is over 90% lower than Portland. But we are straining, and we are straining because we have not kept pace, in my opinion. Our public safety resources have not kept pace with our population increase or the demand increase. And the best example of that, and I know that the sheriff is going to talk about this, is the county jail. Our county jail is too small for our county. It was built over 20 years ago when the county was a lot fewer people, 2/3 of its current size. And without a functioning jail, the rest of the criminal justice system struggles. Because if the jail can't accommodate all the people that need to be arrested, then when they steal a package or a car or break into a car, the police officers at the scene aren't able to provide an immediate consequence and take someone off the street. So the sheriff is doing everything he can with what he has available, but I believe we need more. And I think it's important for all of us to understand that, because the county commissioners are the ones who make the decisions about how well resourced our public safety departments are. And it's not just the jail, it's also the DA's office. We need more resources, even court-appointed attorneys. And you may have seen this in the news. We don't have enough resources for the defense attorneys to represent people on cases as well. So we need more resources. And finally, Portland. The third big challenge that I see is crime seeping into Washington County from Portland. And it's not just anecdotal like the story I told you, it is statistical as well. I looked at who is committing crimes, who are we charging with crimes in Washington County, and how many of these people live in Portland versus Washington County. And I've compared that. What are we seeing today with what we see 3 years ago? And what I can tell you is for the crimes of burglary, we're seeing an 81% increase in Portland criminals compared to 2019 coming into Washington County to burglarize homes and businesses. Robbery, a 114% increase in Portland criminals coming in. Car break-ins, an 85% increase. Car theft, a 35% increase. This just in Portland criminals alone. Firearms offenses, a 139% increase. So this issue of crime from Portland will not stop because people are realizing that if they come into Washington County, they can commit a crime and they can leave and go back into Portland. The Sherwood chief of police, a friend of mine, has a story where his personal car was stolen and found recovered in Portland twice. So it was stolen, recovered, and then it was stolen again and recovered, both times in Portland. So dealing with this issue alongside the resource issue and the addiction issue, I think are going to be the three critical challenges that we need to address to keep our county the safest large county in the state. And I'll turn it over now to the sheriff. Oh, I see a hand is up as well. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's good information, Kevin. I just had a question on the addiction issue. You know, you hear all these statistics on treatment that it's, you know, the greatest, it's 25% recovery rate from treatment. And so is it, I mean, do you see people that are, or do you have a way of seeing if someone's convicted of a crime and goes into treatment, and then what's the rate of re-seeing that person that actually went through treatment as opposed to the person that doesn't go through treatment and just goes and does their time and gets back out? Is there proof that treatment is actually helping?
There is, yeah. There's actually a measurement, it's called recidivism, that we measure in the criminal justice system. And recidivism essentially measures if someone's been convicted of a crime. So I want to back up a second. Not everyone who uses drugs commits crimes. So there's not necessarily a causal relationship between the two. It's not if you do A, then B will happen. However, there's a significant correlation between the two. We see a lot of people who are committing crimes who are also dealing with addiction. So in our system, we have well-functioning and long-standing things called specialty courts and treatment courts. And one that has been running for almost 20 years now is our drug court, where we take people who've committed significant crimes, but we know that these crimes are in part or in whole driven by an addiction. So let's say they are repeat property offenders, they keep stealing and stealing and stealing, but there's an addiction underneath that. By putting them in the specialty court called drug court and making sure that their feet are held to the fire, that they have to go seek drug treatment. If they don't, they'll go to prison, and a judge meets with them and then gives them what are called sanctions. So let's say they slip up and they start using again. Well, they go to jail for a couple of nights as a consequence immediately to keep them on the straight and narrow. A program like that works exceedingly well. And the recidivism rate, which is the measurement of after they've been convicted of this crime, are they arrested or convicted of another crime within a 3 or 5 year period after that? The recidivism rate for graduates of our drug court and our specialty courts is far lower, which is a good thing, than people who have not participated in those courts. It's somewhere between, I want to say, 65 to 75%. So 6 or 7 out of 10 people do not recidivate, do not reoffend. Some people do because it's not a perfect program and we're dealing with human beings. Compare that now to the current structure, which is Ballot Measure 110. And what Ballot Measure 110 did was it said, if you are caught using heroin, if you walk down the street and you are literally injecting yourself with heroin in front of Sheriff Garrett, and he says to you, "Excuse me, sir, is that heroin?" And you say, "Yes, it is." The most he can do is give you a ticket. And you then 30 days or 60 days from receiving that ticket, you are supposed to show up in court. Most heroin users and meth users who get that ticket crumpled up and throw it away. They never show up, and there's nothing that can happen to them as a result, no consequence. And if they do choose to show up, a judge says to them they have a choice. You can voluntarily call a phone number and have what's called a treatment screening, or you can pay a $100 fine. Those that do voluntarily call the phone number, for the last year that this has been in effect for the entire state, only 19 people completed that screening for the entire state for an entire year. So it's been an utter failure. And because we're not holding people's feet to the fire and making them participate in that drug treatment, we're seeing a huge increase in drug use and abuse and a huge corresponding increase in property crime.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Kevin.
and I don't know if I don't want to step on the sheriff's toes, but Darcy, I see you've got a hand up as well. So I'm happy to answer questions or whenever Deanna would like us to do that.
Now is great, and then we can just make sure that we give the sheriff enough opportunity, but probably like we would want to switch over to Sheriff Garrett about 10:30.
I figured I'd just ask my question now since it's something you just spoke about.
Sure.
On the Portland resident crime. So would that also then say that our jail is overloaded, not just with our county residents? Like if they commit a crime in this county, they go to jail in this county, correct? So
Generally speaking, that's correct. Yes.
so that's a compounded problem with the Portland residents having crime in Washington County. Is it's also an issue for our county's jail, correct?
That is correct. So our county's jail serves the county and anyone who commits a crime within the county. It doesn't matter where you live, it's where you commit the crime, generally speaking, and you'll be housed in the jail.
Thank you.
Yep. Zach, I see you've got a question.
Good morning to both of you guys. Thank you for being here. Quick question. You said that the city of Portland's in your top three. I mean, that was like one of your three issues, correct? What is the communication like with the leaders of Multnomah County and specifically the city of Portland and what you do in your office? I mean, if they're part of the problem of what's going on here, how do you guys communicate and collaborate together?
Well, I wish it was better. I think the challenge is speaking for myself. So I have good lines of communication with the DA in Multnomah County, and communication is not the problem. It's philosophy that's the problem. We communicate just fine. We just see things very, very differently. And frankly, it's the failure of the Multnomah County leaders, in my opinion, and I'm speaking only for myself now. It's the failure of multiple leaders at multiple levels, at multiple decision points that have gotten us to the situation that we're in now. And I'll give you an example. If you look at the last 7 years in Multnomah County, and you look at the prosecution of drug crimes and property crimes. So this is basically people who are breaking into homes, stealing cars, committing thefts, etc. The number of prosecutions and convictions in the last 7 years in Portland and Multnomah County has dropped by 90%. Now, just think about that for a moment. That's a precipitous decline. If you look at it on a graph, it just plummets downward. And the result of that, it's a philosophical decision in Multnomah County to not take what's called a punitive approach, to not prosecute people for committing these crimes, to not arrest people for committing these crimes. And every county is entitled to make those decisions, but the reality is no county is an island. And when they make those decisions, it impacts everybody else. No differently than if your neighbor decides they're going to just stop taking care of their house and their car and their yard. At first, well, it's their house. If they don't want to paint their house or mow their lawn, that's their decision. But eventually that home becomes a blight in your neighborhood. And that blight impacts not just the property value of that home, but of everybody around it. And that's what we're starting to see with Multnomah County. The Clackamas County DA would tell you the exact same thing. He and I talk regularly. We're both bordering Multnomah County and seeing the crime come in. It's not an uncommon occurrence, for example, when we do have law enforcement who make an arrest of someone from Portland in Washington County. Commonly, we hear them upset that they're being arrested in Washington County because the refrain is they know they'll be not just arrested, but prosecuted, and there's a very different consequence. So yes, we have good lines of communication, but the problem is a philosophical difference.
Kevin, there was a recent poll, and I don't know who did it, but that showed, and I believe it was just for Washington County, but maybe it was for the entire region, where the number one concern was public safety. And that was a big shift because it's always been other issues. And now all of a sudden we're seeing public safety be at the top of a poll of concerns for residents. What does that mean for us in terms of, how we move forward. This ballot measure 110, oftentimes, voters don't necessarily understand full impact. What are some of the things that as voters we can do to really, I guess, put our vote behind our concern?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Deanna. The thing about public safety is, I always use the analogy, it's sort of like the airbag in your car. How many of us, when we get in our car, we think, boy, I hope my airbag works today? I mean, I've never had that thought. It's there and it works, and you hope that in that moment that you need it, it'll spring into action. And so in normal times, when crime isn't rising, we don't really think about public safety as much. But when we see crime rising, not just property crime, but violent crime, we start worrying more and more about our safety systems, wondering, will that airbag actually deploy when I need it? And so I've worked in the DA's office long enough to see the pendulum swing. Not long ago, people were saying, well, maybe we don't need as many resources, maybe we don't need as many police officers, maybe we shouldn't have as many people prosecuted. But as the pendulum swings and people realize the impact of, for example, defunding of the police and tearing down some of our resources, I think that's when people start to realize, wait a minute, we can't do that. So to answer your question, Deanna, what can people do? I think letting your voice be heard is critical. There are key decisions that are made every year when it comes to public safety. And one of them is the budget, the county budget. So the county budget has an impact on everyone who lives in every city in the county, because, for example, anyone arrested in the county goes only to one spot. There's only one jail. And anyone that's arrested in the county ultimately is prosecuted by basically one spot. There's only one DA. But our resources there are lower than they need to be. And I think if you can communicate to the county commissioners how important it is to have a well-resourced public safety system, not just the sheriff, not just the DA, but also our community corrections department, who supervises people who've been convicted of committing crimes, making sure we have that entire ecosystem well funded. That's the best way to keep Washington County safe. Mark.
Yeah, hi. I have a question about, so when you take someone in, so say in Washington County, someone's arrested, they go to jail, and you said they had two options, either, I think you said it was like pay a fine or go to some program. So say someone decides to go to the program, I mean, what do they have to look forward to, right? What are we giving them to really, because I mean, if we're taking someone in an addiction situation, in my mind, I mean, they're all really concerned about is their next high. So if we get them out of that, what are we giving them for future outlook? Are we providing them jobs in the local community via like small business? Are we providing them with like on the job training or like education opportunities? What kind of stuff are we doing kind of after we get these people in there? So, if we had all the funding and enough police officers and we had enough DAs and we had something, what are we doing after that?
Great question. So let me back up a second. That example I gave of pay a fine or come to court, that is for people who are using drugs. So under Ballot Measure 110, it took anyone who uses illegal drugs, meth, heroin, etc., and it took it outside of the criminal justice system. Now it's no different than getting a parking ticket or littering or parking in a handicapped spot. So it's not criminal, it's not legal, but it's not criminal anymore. Just like parking in a handicapped is not legal, but it's not a crime. And those people have a choice: pay a fine or call a telephone number. And that's it, period. Putting that aside, when we have other people who commit crimes, let's say they break into your home and steal your TV and they sell it and they buy drugs, those people, when they're caught, they are charged with, a burglary or a robbery or a theft or whatever that crime might be. And then, once they're convicted of that crime, then they're put on typically what's called probation, or they'll go to prison or jail, depending on the severity of their crime. But in either scenario, probation, where they're supervised in the community, or jail or prison, in either scenario, making sure they participate in drug treatment is required. So they have to participate in drug treatment. And then if they don't participate in the drug treatment, they're found in violation of that. Part of that treatment is this rehabilitation effort to help connect them to stable housing, a supportive network of people who can support them as peers, helping to reconnect them with jobs. And that's what the work of our community corrections department does. They help essentially rehabilitate this person to bring them back into the community. And that's why I said earlier, it's important to have a well-resourced public safety system, the entire ecosystem, because we want our community corrections department to be able to work with these folks to help reunite them to be productive members of our society. So that work is happening, but it's also straining under a lack of public safety resources. And that's something the county ultimately has control over in terms of how they choose to allocate and prioritize funding. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I guess, and then to go a little bit deeper on that. So has there been any talk about doing something to maybe help fund, like for example, I'm a small business owner and I would love to help out, say, someone who's struggling to get their life back. I have friends personally who've gone through that, family, stuff like that. So is there any kind of thing in place where, you know, say as a small business owner, I can hire a couple people who are in recovery in, say, one of these programs and get like some of their pay covered or something, or like that is like an incentive to you know, obviously kind of help teach these people job skills and give them somewhere to work and things like that?
You know, I don't know the answer to the part about the subsidized pay, but I do know that there are programs to help connect you with people who are looking for jobs and trying to reenter society. And I can put you in touch with a person named Steve Berger. He's the director of Washington County Community Corrections, and he would have a better read on, you know, who you call for that. The other thing is the county is taking steps to do a good thing called the Center for Addiction Triage and Treatment, or CATT for short, which is a way to provide more resources for people dealing with addiction before they commit a crime, you know, before they break into that house or steal that car. So there are efforts underway, but that's, you know, still in process, and they're working at, you know, finding a location, et cetera. But I'll put you in touch with Steve Berger.
Okay,
Thank you so much.
thank you.
Kevin, I might add that the chamber is looking at working with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which has a program for helping businesses work with folks that were, you know, formerly in the justice system and providing opportunity. Nothing, you know, creates more opportunity than scarcity, and workforces, you know, in that position of being, you know, having scarce resources, and it creates opportunity for businesses to learn more about, you know, how to enter and welcome someone that has, you know, a past history, criminal history, into their workplace, and to make that a really positive opportunity for both parties.
That's great.
Excellent. Sheriff Garrett, we can pivot to you if you are ready.
Thank you, Deanna. I just want to start by saying I agree with Barton's assessments across the board. He and I have, you know, different roles, but we come to the same conclusions based on the experiences that we have in our roles and working with our partners. And I think a good starting point is just to restate that this is according to the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission's report, one of the reports that they crafted in 2020, that Washington County has the second smallest jail in the state per 1,000 capita. The reason that's a problem is because we are overcrowded almost all the time. And when we're overcrowded, we have to release somebody who's pre-adjudicated before they would otherwise be released, either through bail, a court release, recog, so that we maintain our constitutional requirements as far as how many people we have in the jail at any one time. Our maximum capacity is 572. In 2019, before the pandemic, we forced released over 1,000 individuals in custody because of overcrowding. This year, we are on track to force release. Our current projections are about 2,000 people. So if you have someone in custody for stealing a car in Hillsborough and they get forced released because of overcrowding before they have seen a judge to promise to show up for arraignment, or maybe get detoxed, as Kevin was mentioning, then they're more likely to commit another crime. And so having a sufficient jail is an important community justice system resource. And the pandemic magnified this problem, this challenge that we have in Washington County. on March 16th of 2020, when the pandemic was really getting a hold of our community, we, to comply with health-related requirements in congregate settings, emptied out our one dormitory housing unit in our jail, 60 beds. We worked with the presiding judge to make those releases that presented the lowest community risk, and then we kept that housing unit closed until recently. We've reopened it. We also had some restrictions on bookings. Some misdemeanors were issued a citation. Some misdemeanor arrests in the community were issued a citation to appear in court instead of being booked in jail. Again, to comply with health-related requirements that jails had to comply with across the state. On April 4th, we opened our bookings back up to every probable cause arrest that a police officer, a deputy sheriff, or a trooper makes in Washington County. So we were fully reopened. Our staff did a fantastic job to keep those in custody during the pandemic as safe and healthy as possible. In 2021 and year to date, we had 95 individuals in custody who tested positive for COVID, and we had booked over 15,000 individuals during that time. Early this year, in February, we had our single major outbreak of the entire pandemic in the jail. We had individuals in custody who tested positive in 5 of our 8 housing units, and we had staff also quarantined and isolated because of their infections as well. We got through that bit of a crisis, and today we have no staff that are out sick. We have 2 individuals in custody who are isolated because of symptoms, though they have not tested positive. So we're on a really good trajectory, keeping a close eye on the subvariants work. But the trajectory is very, very promising. We are fully reopened as a criminal justice resource. We're still masked up in jail when we're with adults in custody. If you come into our secure perimeter, whether you're bringing someone into custody to be booked as a police officer, or whether you're showing up for work, or whether I'm walking through the jail visiting with folks, we temperature check everybody first. You wear a mask the entire time you're around our adults in custody. And then we have those individuals who are on a work crew. They clean the jail from one side to the other and then start over again. The jail has been more clean these past 2 years than at any time before. Much as District Attorney Barton said, what can you do to help? When you talk with your county commissioners, the jail, a study to evaluate the needs of our jail going forward is part of the master's facilities plan that the county is getting underway. We just want to take every opportunity to reinforce why it's important that the jail be a part of that plan. It is currently part of that plan, but it's in very, very early stages. And so we communicating that need is really important for all of us. I want to switch over to crime for a moment. From a quantitative standpoint, as Kevin said, when you look at the combined crime rate that the FBI tracks, Washington County has the lowest crime rate of the 5 most populous counties. When we look at reports that we at the Sheriff's Office take, and most of those reports are serving our 214,000 residents of our urban unincorporated areas, like Aloha, Rock Creek, Garden Home, Bethany, and the like. Our crime reports for some significant kinds of crimes have risen considerably since the pandemic. Domestic violence is up 20%. Stolen vehicles up 43%. Mail theft is up 146%. Theft of vehicle parts and accessories, our reports are up 220% in 2 years. In 2021, we took 714 reports of thefts from cars, and of those, fully 1/3 were just catalytic converters. We also, in this past 6 months, so we conducted a survey community survey in September and October in the urban unincorporated area, our primary service provider as first responders. And then again in November and December, we polled over 1,000 residents, and their significant concerns based on those polls were nonviolent crime like theft, vandalism. That was a really big issue for those who responded to the survey. Housing insecurity, right? Our homeless, houseless situation, those with mental health issues, substance use disorder, right? Addiction, and then violent crime as well. Those were all really polled very high. It reinforces that what we're doing on the with our mental health response team is the right thing. And my thanks to Hillsborough Police Department for helping us expand those mental health response team services. That's pairing a specially trained police officer with a master's level mental health clinician to respond to people in crisis or with behavioral health issues, to support those in the community who have mental health challenges but are independent. They develop relationships with that community, and they often divert people from the criminal justice system into resources and treatment. That has been a service that we provided countywide for over 10 years. And I'm glad to say we've been able to expand that services to our partners like the City of Hillsborough. 3 things you can do to help keep our community safe. Support your first responders. Funding for the Hillsborough Police Department, funding for Kevin's team at the DA's office. And I'll just give you an example of what we've done on public safety that has meant more work for people like Kevin's prosecutors. So we are fully camered up with body cameras. Hillsborough has been for a number of years. That is fantastic evidence. It helps us know whether we're doing the right thing in the community. And when we do make a mistake, it helps give us really good information to know where we need to do better. It also helps us respond to complaints when our deputies and police officers are doing the right thing, because we have the video evidence. But that video needs to be watched before a charging decision on Kevin's team, for example. So he has greater needs, and we're just trying to get the county to support those needs. So supporting our public safety system so that the county can support cities is a really important part of what you can do. Number 2, elevate your voice at the county's upcoming public hearings on the budget process. The public hearing for the county's overall budget is scheduled for June 21st. I'm happy to share details with Deanna about that later. If you happen to live in the urban unincorporated area, that's outside the city of Hillsborough, but in the urban area, the public hearing for the Enhanced Sheriff's Patrol District is scheduled for June 1st. And would love to see you there and hear from you. And if you do live in the urban unincorporated area, I would just urge you as the elected sheriff to vote yes on Measure 34310. I know you have expressed your support, and I can't tell you how thankful I am for hearing us out, really considering it in all seriousness, and then coming out in support of that measure. That means a ton to us. So thank you for that. That will just help us continue those current services that we're talking about today. The last thing I want to say, and then I'd love to field your questions, Kevin's remarks about substance use disorder and addiction. Part of having an ability to respond promptly to 911 calls means that we can save lives. Both Hillsborough police officers and deputy sheriffs have life-saving naloxone with them now. And I know that in 2021, deputy sheriffs used naloxone in overdose cases to revive people 42 times. And we saved lives as a result. Maybe not, maybe some of the 42 would have been revived without naloxone treatment. But that's a really important part of what we do now, is if we beat emergency medical there, we have naloxone, we're administering naloxone in opioid overdose cases, and we're saving people's lives as a result of it. I served on the Governor's Alcohol and Drug Policy Commission for 4 years. Right before the pandemic, we completed our strategic plan. The governor asked us to create a strategic plan to address the substance use disorder crisis in the state. We completed it, COVID hit, everything got pushed to the right. In my view, the governor has failed to establish an emergency declaration to do what we need to do to address substance use disorder. The Alcohol and Drug Policy Commission has an excellent statewide strategic plan to address it. It will take enabling legislation, and frankly, the state has not placed enough emphasis on executing that plan as they should. And so there's opportunities when you talk to your legislative electeds and anyone from the governor's office. The Alcohol and Drug Policy Commission strategic plan to address substance use disorder has to be made a higher priority. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. Questions from our participants? Mr. Smith.
I have two questions. One just kind of popped into my head after that last statement. If you removed drug and alcohol and mental health issues, what percentage of the crime rate would be wiped out? And then my second question is, all during the pandemic, the defund police thing kind of exploded. Are you seeing that? Is that still as strong as it was? Is that a thing? Was that a thing in Washington County, or was that just more of a urban setting type of thing?
Great questions, Brad. Thank you. So in my estimation and talking with our jail staff and our deputies, I think if you were to combine the crime drivers, so as Kevin said, not everyone who has a substance use disorder commits crime, but it does drive crime, particularly property crimes. If you were to remove that element, I think close to half of the criminal conduct that we see, especially if you add in behavioral health issues, and there are intersections, right? Behavioral health and substance use disorder, it'd be about half the crimes that we see today would not be committed. And I'm speculating, but Brad, we used to have one housing unit in our jail that was a special needs pod. That's those who were in custody who are on psychotropic medications to treat behavioral health issues. Deputies are telling me that we're getting close to having a special needs jail. We have people on psychotropic medications really housed in almost every housing unit in our jail right now. It's just a function of having a state that is at the bottom or near the bottom for both substance use disorder treatment access and behavioral health treatment access. To your question about defund police. So I worked with Commissioner Willie to draft a resolution that the Board of Commissioners ultimately passed. That the resolution, let's see here, it basically said that we the county will not defund public safety. We will continue to work in ways that honors diversity and reform. We understand that we have areas where we need to continue to change and evolve. Hear that loud and clear, and I'd be happy to talk about the changes that we have made. But to Kevin's point, and again, I can't agree more that it feels a little bit like defunding in very small increments. When you have a jail that's too small for your county, that's not being sufficiently funded. If you don't have enough prosecutors or defense attorneys, even at the state level, who funds community corrections, the cases that are parole and probation officers who play the long game. They take people who are offenders and are transitioning back into the community, and to ensure they have wraparound services. When they get off track, they go back to jail for a couple of days to get their attention, as Kevin said, and they go back on supervision. The caseload that our parole and probation officers are able to maintain is decreased over the recent years because the state has failed to fund adequately community corrections. So there are resource issues, as Kevin said, but from a policy standpoint, defund, that's not something that our county is pursuing.
Can I jump in and add something there? Is that okay?
Please.
So I agree with everything Pat has said. I want to add two other comments. There is a small but vocal group of people who have appeared in front of the commissioners and advocated for defunding. And I don't want to turn this into anything political, but one of those people is the person who's running against me for DA. There's a group that was formed called the Washington County Justice Initiative. And its mission statement is to, quote, defund police, prosecution, and prisons. And they've advocated vocally for defunding. So I wanted to flag that. And then second, I think there are two types of defunding. There's explicit defunding where you take away. We saw that happen in Portland when they defunded the Portland police and eliminated the gun violence reduction team in 2020. But there's also what I'm going to call soft defunding, and that's the failure to maintain, no differently than if you stopped, let's say, maintaining your car. You stopped doing the things you need to do to make sure it works, rotating the tires, changing the brakes, changing the oil. Eventually your car will run poorer and poorer, and then one day it won't run at all. And that's what we're seeing with the failure to maintain adequate resources across the board jail, DA's office, community corrections. So that death by 1,000 paper cuts, soft defunding, in my opinion, is absolutely happening in Washington County, which is different than explicit defunding, but the same effect exists, in my opinion.
So I have a question. I'm not sure who to direct it to, and it's very self-serving, so my apologies. But every time there's a news report regarding catalytic converters being stolen, my husband screams at the television, why aren't they arresting the people that are buying them? Because they obviously have, they've been stolen. So how the catalytic converter thing, I don't understand. I don't understand the sale, what the benefit is. Obviously they're benefiting from a monetary perspective, but that has seemed to become a big deal.
It is a big deal, Deanna. And just this last session, I think it was this last legislative session, legislators passed a bill that required more identification, the VIN number off the car that the converter is coming from. There are clearly illegal transactions of catalytic converters happening. And if we become aware of it and have probable cause to make an arrest as a result, we're absolutely going to do that. Yeah, I wish I had an answer to this problem. It is huge, though. You're absolutely right.
About a month ago, maybe a month and a half ago, Beaverton police pulled over a truck that had over 200 stolen catalytic converters in its back. So what's happening is they're stealing them here and they're shipping them out of region or out of state. So that's the problem. The problem is it's not that they're all being stolen and then processed in Washington County. They're being stolen and then shipped out somewhere else because there's a rare metal that's in there that's very valuable and they can sell it on the black market. And so that multi-jurisdictional aspect is what makes it impossible to solve locally, because until you address the people that they're selling it to, which are out of region, you won't be able to stop the thefts from happening unless you arrest and prosecute the thieves.
Thank you. Mark.
So on that note, I had a question. So why aren't we going to the manufacturers and saying, hey, this is a big problem. What can we do to resolve this? I mean, it seems to me like that if we could eliminate, I mean, I know this is a very isolated thing with catalytic converters, but it seems to me kind of like a failure on, these businesses and companies creating these items to make it. I mean, it hangs on the bottom. I can get underneath it with a Sawzall and cut it off in 2 minutes. I mean, is there not any way we can like start working with the manufacturers and stuff to kind of solve some of these problems at the beginning before the car even makes it off the line, the catalytic converter's underneath something or not right out in the open or like has a plate or something? I mean, stuff like that. I feel like maybe we're trying to solve the symptoms of the problem rather than going and solving the problem, right? I mean, if the catalytic converters weren't so expensive or, I mean, they wouldn't be as valuable or something. I don't know, just kind of thoughts I had, but I don't know. Is that something that's even brought up? Like solving it, but
Mark, I love the way you think. Given it's a national problem, it's probably a national effort, to work with manufacturers. And then at the end of the day, if that adds cost to the manufacturing of a car, that's we can only make suggestions. An organization like the National Sheriff's Association or the National Chiefs of Police can certainly make that recommendation. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's the manufacturers, it's the car companies that are gonna decide how they design their cars. And perhaps, that could be a market advantage if you have a secure catalytic converter. Frankly, I haven't given that any thought. I'd love the idea. And from at least a state association, I'm happy to take it up with our state association and see if it's a conversation on a wider level.
Hello again. So we at the Chamber have a seat on the TriMet Reimagine campaign, Reimagine Public Safety. And so yesterday I actually had the opportunity to ride the TriMet into Portland with the newly created, I'm going to get this their name wrong, but it's like the first response safety team for TriMet, which isn't quite security. But it was really interesting to watch them because they rode all different lines, buses and the Max around Portland. And they were kind of met with resistance at first, but their real goal is to build relationships with the riders and offering them help to different services, helping them out with the clothes that they may need or food if they're hungry. I guess, what are your guys' initial thoughts on these newly created like safety programs that are being created in agencies like TriMet, that aren't quite law enforcement, aren't, in their case, everybody thought they were ticket enforcement at first until they made that relationship. I guess, is that a trend that we're going to start seeing in the safety world, or what does that look like?
You want to go, Kevin, or do you want me to jump on that first?
I'll go after you, Pat. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think there are opportunities, and we should look very seriously at those opportunities where we can innovate along the lines of a presence that may be less than a uniformed officer. In the case of TriMet, that's a very unique environment. And it provides an opportunity for that kind of a presence that makes a ton of sense. Look, TriMet has also reached out to us and said, we would like to fund a mental health response team deputy and clinician, because we see the value in that work. It's not cahoots. Cahoots is a very much not a master's level clinician, doesn't have the security component when needed. And so we're staffing a team that's just going to ride TriMet West Side and be able to have that clinician's ability to work with folks who have behavioral health issues. The specially trained deputy, they're tied into the hospitals. They also they're a very unique approach to public safety as well that has been successful and resonated. And I think it's just part of a range of possibilities that we should consider and explore. So yeah, I think there's potential.
And I'll just add, I agree with everything Pat just said, but I'll add to it. TriMet has a very unique business model that I would guess many of the business operators and owners in this room don't have, which is on your honor, you can pay or not pay, and it won't be enforced. That's really weird. And it's unique, I think, among businesses and unique among mass transit. And so I think the question for me is, what's different about TriMet as compared to mass transit in other major American cities? And why is it that TriMet has not gotten safer over the years, but has actually gotten more dangerous? Because at the end of the day, when mass transit gets more dangerous, it has a disproportionate negative effect on the poor and historically marginalized. People who can afford to drive their car and pay for parking don't have to take TriMet, but people who cannot, they have to take TriMet to get to and from work. Their kids have to take it to get to and from work or school, or just to move around the community. And so when I see public safety deteriorate along the TriMet line, and by that I mean on the train, but also around it, I think a big reason is the lack of fair enforcement, and it's allowing people who are committing these crimes to commit these crimes and move around the county in a way that hurts sometimes the most marginalized people the most. And that, I think, is incredibly concerning, and doesn't have to be that way, but I think the business model is set up that it seems to allow that to occur.
All right, we're getting close to the end of our program. Any final questions for either Sheriff Garrett or District Attorney Kevin Barton? Oh, Mr. Smith.
I just had a comment. I mean, I want to thank both of you for the job you do. It's a lot like teachers. You always hear the bad things, you never hear the good things. Nobody really likes to see a sheriff's car behind them unless they need it, or unless they're breaking into their house at 1 o'clock in the morning when they're wrapping presents. So thank you for what you do. I know you probably don't always hear that a lot from the community. You just hear people yelling at you. So I just want to thank you for your job.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Nice way to end it. Any final comments from either Sheriff or District Attorney Barton?
Deanna, everybody, I just want to thank you for giving us the time and connecting. I hope to be back soon. Us hearing from you is is more important, frankly, than you hearing from us, because it informs us about whether we're on track, off track. So thank you for sharing your thoughts and for your excellent questions.
Well, we are recording this program, so we will be sending it out to our 2,500 email list, and hope that they will participate in listening to what you had to say. I think the crime statistics that you're talking about are things that we should all be concerned about. We should all be making sure that, you know, we've got the right people in the right places to make sure that Washington County remains the safest county, large county in the state of Oregon. I think that's important to all of us. I know that underneath public safety for residents in the region is quality of life. That's their second biggest concern, is their quality of life. And, you know, thinking back to, you know, just maybe 5 or, 10 years ago, those kinds of things were things we celebrated. And so we need to make sure we're not going in the wrong direction. And I think we have 2 people in the right places, in the right spots, to ensure that we're really moving forward. So thank you for that. And thank you for taking your time today.
Thank you all.